Hi, good afternoon, everybody, assuming that you're listening to this live, and welcome to today's ISE podcast, where we're going to be talking all about the future of internships and placements. I'm really excited about today's agenda. Obviously, at the early stages of this current crisis that we're all experiencing, we did quite a bit on internships and placements, but that was very much in the kind of the immediacy of what people would do to deal with the situation. So we'll cover a bit of that today, but also start to think about the future and how the situation may evolve as we get a bit more sophisticated in our approaches. Just to give you, if you haven't logged into an ISE webinar before, I'll just let you know how they work. We have our panelists that I'll introduce you to in a minute. We record the webinars automatically and they go onto our YouTube channel. If you're an ISE member, you can have access to that for a month before it goes public and available to everybody. We keep all your microphones automatically on mute, just because with the number of people logging on, we've got over 123 people logging on to this today. So obviously, if everybody tries to talk over each other, it could be just a little bit of a mess. But we really do want your questions, and the panel are geared up to answer those questions that you may have. So please use the dialogue box on this platform. I will be question moderator, so I will, if I can do, I'll feed them in as we go along. If not, we've left time on the agenda for 10 minutes or so to answer your questions at the end. So please, I really do encourage you to make the most of this opportunity and ask what questions that you can. So this webinar is recorded. As I said, it will go onto our YouTube channel. It takes a little while to download, so if it's not later on today, it may well be tomorrow. Please feel free to share that link and use it amongst your teams, because we're obviously very keen to share all the learning and insights that we can do in this difficult period. So that's enough for me. I think it's time we found out who our panel are. So if I can just get you guys to introduce yourselves, I'll go through in sort of the order that you appear on my screen. But there's somebody you can't see, because actually she can only join us by voice, and that's Laura from HSBC. So Laura, do you want to just kick us off and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Laura Anderson. I'm the Graduate and Intern Development Lead at HSBC UK.
Thanks, Laura. And how much has obviously lockdowns and coronavirus has impacted you quite heavily? Just briefly, have you still been doing internships? Have you still been getting people into your organisation?
Yes, luckily we have been able to. So slightly delayed, so not as long as we would have wanted them for. So our interns were shortened from 8 to 5 weeks, and our grads were a 2-month delayed start. But we're still able to put on all our programmes, and our industrial placement started on time. So we've had a bit of a mixed bag with our programmes, but really pleased that we were still able to host them.
Fab. And we'll go into that in a bit more detail over the coming 3/4 of an hour. Carolyn, would you like to go next?
Yep, I'm Carolyn O'Connor. I'm the HR manager for early careers at Ashurst, and I manage all of our early careers activity on a national basis. So we have programmes in Glasgow and also in London.
Fantastic. And overall, have you still been recruiting, still doing internships?
Yep, we've been working with Thomas and inside Sherpa, so a bit like Laura, they have gone ahead just at a slightly different timetable to what we had initially planned, and shortened down slightly as well. So we saw our 3-week vacation scheme shortened down to 1 week, and our 1-week spring scheme was shortened down to a couple of days. But we've still had a great experience, and in terms of recruitment, we successfully, for the first time ever, inducted 20 new graduates into the business last week, which was really interesting, and again using the Inside Sherpa platform, which has been a bit of a godsend over the last few months. So still very busy, but yes, just a slightly different take to what we would normally do.
Fantastic. Yes, I'm hearing that a lot from employers, that actually this hasn't been a time of actually, having a bit of an easier life. Actually, it's been an awfully lot more complicated and a lot more hours work. So, yeah, and that was a perfect link to you, Tom. Tom, would you like to go next and introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Tom. I'm one of the co-founders of Inside Sherpa. I live in very smoky at the moment, San Francisco. And for those who don't know what we do at Inside Sherpa, we do two things primarily. Firstly, we work with a bunch of fantastic organizations such as Carolyn at Ashurst to create open access online training courses for university students to build skills and confidence. And then the second part of our business, which really we developed in response to COVID and some of the challenges that our partner employers were facing during COVID, is providing technology infrastructure to allow companies to facilitate their actual internship programs through an online platform, which is hosted on the Inside Sherpa platform.
Thanks, Tom. I should say that's part of the reason that we normally do our webinars of a lunchtime for those that sort of listen to these frequently live, but to accommodate East Coast time, where it's still early in the morning, isn't it, Tom? Or is it late at night? I get really confused with my own timing.
It's 8 in the morning, so it's a good way to start the day.
Good way to start the day. Fantastic. And last but no means least, Ollie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Ollie Sidwell, co-founder of RMP, and RMP covers various brands in the early career space. So Rate My Placement, Rate My Apprenticeship, on-campus promotions, the new awards, various brands associated with that.
Cool, thanks, Ollie. So as I'm sure you'll agree, we've got a really good, well-informed panel lined up for this afternoon. So Laura, if I can just turn to you, we started to sort of talk about a little bit around this. You know, lockdown landed just as many organisations like yourself might have been bringing in students for Easter spring weeks, or very much gearing up to summer placements. You know, how was your organisation and those programmes initially impacted?
Well, it feels like so long ago now. It's hard to think back to that period. I think the challenge that we had was, as a organisation that runs its programmes globally, was to try and get consistency in what we did in different countries and different markets, whilst trying to then still deploy what we needed to do. So I suppose our immediate reaction was to look at, well, what can we still keep and maintain? What do we want to be known for? And then to sort of make decisions from there. So very quickly a decision was made that we would honour all existing offers that had been made, which I was really pleased about. Nobody in our world ever wants to be in the case of where we're saying, no, we have to go back on our offers. So really pleased that we could continue with that. It did give some of our interns and graduates a little bit of nervousness, I think, because although we were saying we still want to continue with those, at that point we didn't know what to tell them about when they would actually be starting or what the impact would be. So there was, I think, a couple of months of sort of nervousness, but as quickly as possible we got back to them to confirm that our internship would be going ahead. We had to delay the start of that, and I think initially our hope was that this wasn't going to go on for as long as it did, and that we could still continue to run our programs as we normally would, and that this was just a blip and it was going to go away. I think we got to that point quite quickly that wasn't going to be the case, and sort of realised that we would need to do something a little bit different from the norm. And we ended up running, all of our inductions have been run virtually. Our whole internship programme has been virtual, so placement, projects, etc. And our graduates are due to start with us in 2 weeks' time, and that's all going to be virtual as well. So it's definitely an interesting time.
But also it's good to hear that positive news. I mean, it is a difficult market out there. We can't deny that, and there's some, there's going to be some people that that are really going to struggle to find work. But it's good to hear that the organisations like yourself are still committed to your grads. I saw PwC were tweeting today all their graduate staff. I think it's about 1,300 or something. So so it's good to hear that employers are still sticking with those graduate numbers. Carolyn, what about from your end? What were your initial experiences? Sort of, if we can, it does seem a long time ago. There's Easter, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Were they similar to Laura's?
Probably similar to Laura's, because like HSBC, we're global as well. So we had started to see lockdown happening in Hong Kong, Singapore. So we kind of knew it was coming, and we'd started to plan probably January, February time. What will we do if we do go into a lockdown? But probably similar to Laura and I think everyone else in the UK, we didn't expect that we would still be in lockdown 6 months later. So initially we reached out to the students who had been confirmed on, we call it vacation schemes, which are similar to internships, to say, look, we absolutely do intend to continue with this, but we expect that we may have to postpone later to either summer or kind of autumn months. But again, like Laura had mentioned, as the weeks went on, we realised actually I don't think that's actually going to be possible. The business, we're still very much committed to the future. We recruit a couple of years in advance. We had worked through the global financial crash and saw a real issue with trying to get talent where firms had completely froze their recruitment. So we wanted to learn from that. So the business was committed to going ahead with our plans. And then we had to work with Thomas and his team to say, right, okay, we're going to go ahead with this, but how is it going to look? How can we replicate as best as we can that experience, ensure that it's interactive and that students get the best experience that they can with working with us. So that was kind of the decision made to move to the vacation schemes in the summer. As I said earlier, they were much later than initially planned. So our spring scheme that normally takes place in April took place in August, and the summer was just a month later, but later on in July. A lot of nervousness from students, I think, naturally quite concerned our vacation scheme pipelines onto our graduate scheme. I think they'd read a lot in the press around other law firms freezing recruitment and completely pulling their schemes, so having to manage all of that as well was quite difficult, but we did get there. It does feel like a lifetime ago, albeit it was just back in March. But yeah, we adapted, I think quite well, and we were able to replicate some of the things that we would normally do face to face. We tried to replicate where we could, but obviously you can't do that with absolutely everything.
So can I just ask kind of how they evolved, Carolyn? Were you able to do things like, I don't know, virtual projects, training and developing, kind of some of the induction stuff? I'm just interested to know actually what that kind of experience was like.
Yeah, what we did is we sat down with what we would normally have on a vacation scheme. So we would normally have a full week, or if it's spring, it's a full week. If it's summer, it's a full 3 weeks. And a lot of that is work shadowing. So we were able to quickly adapt the general kind of induction material. So learning about the business, how to get the most out of the scheme. We were able to quickly move that to online learning. That was the easy fix. But in terms of recreating the job shadowing, that was where we came up against kind of, right, okay, we're going to have problems with this. So we put together a content creation team. So we got stakeholders within the business, we got our current grads to assist with that, and started to pull together materials that we could use so that the candidates coming on would still be able to get an understanding of what the job would entail. So we put together exercises and things like that would, albeit it's not the exact same as job shadowing, they're not going to get that full experience, but it would still allow them to get an understanding of the work that they would normally be part of within our business, and they would still be able to engage with stakeholders. So we put together mentors and supervisors for them to kind of work closely with as well. So that was probably the biggest shift in terms of that wouldn't normally be something that we would do. They would normally go into different practice areas and very much learn about that team and the type of work that they're involved in the moment, we knew we couldn't do that. So it was just around creating those exercises to ensure that they got a good flavour of what to do. We were able to incorporate quite a lot of social events, which were actually quite fun. We had virtual yoga, we had virtual escape room as well, which was really, really good fun, and able to do virtual networking where we used kind of GoTo and Zoom, where you can create small rooms so that it feels kind of not feels too intimidating. If you've got a kind of GoTo or Zoom and you've got 100 people on, you just can't interact with each other. But if you have it with small groups, it makes it much easier. And for each programme, we debriefed at the end to try and improve for the next, and then work that into our induction that we ran last week, and we're just continuing to evaluate as we go along to see what worked and what didn't work.
Okay, thanks, Carolyn. And Laura, what about yourself? Obviously, you will have evolved your programs over the summer time. What kind of experiences were you able to give to the students that you worked with?
I hope they'd say a good one, but I suppose time will tell. So we were slightly different than Carolyn in that we didn't use a virtual platform to host our internship. So we did stick with putting our interns into placements. So they did work with people in the business. I suppose the thing that we had in our favour was our programmes are normally nationally mobile anyway. So we're used to having interns spread across the country, albeit normally they are working in an office with a team and they have other interns around about them, and we normally bring them together at the start, the middle and the end so that they can build connections and things with each other. So I suppose there was 3 things we needed to make sure we did. One was line manager education, because you can't just expect the managers to know how to onboard and induct somebody into a team in a virtual environment, because this is new to all of us. So we spent quite a bit of time investing on that. We did quite a lot around about being successful in a virtual office. So for the interns, talking them through some of the basics that we've all learned through our times working from home, but for them would be brand new. So things like netiquette, the things that you do and don't do on a Zoom call, like those sorts of things. And how do you sort of build connections remotely? That was one of their biggest worries. I think once we said to them, we're definitely starting, we're doing this, like come to the party, they were really grateful, but then they started to worry that it wouldn't be the same experience that they would get in the office. And I think that was a genuine concern and probably something they were right to be worried about. But what we said was, we're not trying to make it the same. It's a completely different experience. We appreciate that. And actually, I think it worked out better. So we finished our internship on Friday and we had a celebration event for them. And the feedback that we've had is that they couldn't have imagined it being any better in person than what they were able to achieve virtually. And in part, I think it was down to them, because they really built up strong bonds and friendships. So like Caroline did, like there was loads of socials, like I think they were on till like 2 o'clock in the morning some days. So they really made the most of every single opportunity that we gave them, embraced all the projects. We did things around about diversity inclusion. We raised over £14,000 for Sue Ryder, and they did that off the back of a £10 starter fund. So yeah, like I think they made it their own as well, as our graduates facilitating it as well.
Wow, 14 grand, that's impressive, particularly when you can't get around sort of and hustle people face to face. Ollie, I was going to ask you about your research, but just before I do, I mean, the experiences that Carolyn and Laura have been able to provide, is that something that you've seen sort of replicated across all the employers that you work with?
Yeah, very much so. It's been a real different way of trying to work out how to run these schemes, and I think overall everyone's been so keen to continue with their plans, and given everything hit March, April time, that was bang in line with all the Easter insights or one-day programs that go on around there, certainly for the banks and law firms. So I think they were harder hit, and I think some of your research stated that what 2/3 of undergraduate programs had to be cancelled around that time. But certainly going into the summer, I think everyone's been much more keen to try and work out how it could look, try and facilitate it as best they can, and to give and show students as good an experience as they possibly can. To, again, the whole point of it is to build the talent pipeline for the future. So you want to show them a good experience of your brand. And yeah, we've got some results to certainly talk you through to see how that's gone.
Sure. Just before I do, I was going to ask the same question to Tom, actually, just to get you in the conversation, Tom. So that sort of what you've heard from Karen, obviously you work with lots of, is it mostly law firms you work with, Tom, or do you work with other sectors as well?
Yeah, so we're sector agnostic. So we work with, banks. So we don't just work in the UK. We work across Asia, Australia, here in the US, and now Africa, and the UK. And so in the UK, we heavily work with law firms, but globally, we work with big banks, consulting firms, construction companies, a fashion design company even. So yeah, we're pretty sector agnostic in terms of the organizations we actually work with.
And that kind of experiences that we've been hearing about, again, is that broadly replicated across all the employers that you work with?
Yes, yeah, very much so. So I think we saw, and I can get into this later, we obviously saw some like nuanced differences between different industries in terms of how they responded to COVID and transitioning their programs virtually. And even, I guess, like taking a step back, like we saw some industries disproportionately cancelled their internships. So we work with like a few large global tech and travel companies as an example, and so they were like, obviously it's hard to escape that their businesses are the hardest hit from a situation like COVID, whereas professional services generally fared much better. And so I think like the appetite from business to be able to kind of continue to run their internship programs was probably easier in some situations. So we're like very, while we'd love to see every kind of corporate offer their internships, we also like totally acknowledge, and I think one thing we've learned is like different businesses are affected differently through COVID, and it's somewhat unfair to, I guess, like hold everyone to the same standard. But in terms of how they actually like transitioned their programs online, we certainly saw nuances between different industries and different regions as well. So like we saw, some interesting things happen here in the US. But for the most part, like, we were super impressed. I say this generally, and I don't say this lightly, but we genuinely see like UK employers kind of leading the way with just being adaptable, picking up new technology, doing things differently. We see UK employers generally are out in front compared to a lot of other regions.
That's great to hear, Joel. I think we'll quote you on that, we'll get that on our website somewhere. But I think I agree with that. I mean, some of the stuff that I've done abroad, you do see the way the UK market operates. That kind of agnostic approach to what people study makes us, quite a different market. But I guess we'll get some of those differences a bit later. But yes, Ollie, you mentioned the research you've been conducting among students. That was something I really was keen that we dived into a little bit. So what have they been telling you about their experiences?
Yeah, so at the start of everything kicking off, we obviously didn't have a review platform that was relevant for virtual schemes. And by nature of Rate My Placement, if you haven't heard of it, we allow students to rate and review their experiences on placements, internships, and insights. So we developed an extra bit of functionality that allows students to rate and review their virtual internships. And I say internship, that can be anything from, as Carolyn was saying, like a shortened summer internship, or that can be a one-day insight program or a 3-week vacation scheme. So we've collected all this data over the last 4 months from students reviewing their placements, internships, and insights that have been virtual, and we've had about 500 different reviews submitted across about 40 different companies. There has been a predominance around banks, because that's the majority of certainly the Easter programs are between banks and law firms. So there is a general lean to banks and law firms, but there's 40 companies overall. So it's quite a good representation across other industries too. So going to ask you a quiz for you all. So the average review rating on Rate My Placements is 7.8 out of 10. Do you think the virtual internships are rated higher or lower than a 7.8 out of 10? What do we think? I can't ask the audience, I've got to ask the panelists. Carolyn, you're going higher. Anyone want to challenge that?
Well, I'm biased, so I'm going to say higher.
I would have said higher too. I'll go with Carolyn.
Well, I'm going to go lower just because you've all gone higher. I'll be a bit contrary, but I suspect I'm wrong.
By being contrary, it's not helped you out, yeah. So 3/4 of you were correct. It is higher. So out of all the 500 reviews we've had, the average review rating is higher. It's 8.2 out of 10. So it doesn't sound like a lot higher, but actually in real terms, that is quite a lot. And we've been really, really pleased with the results we've seen. 92% of the reviews, the students leaving reviews would recommend their experience to a friend. Like 92% is, I think, is extremely high for schemes that have just been turned around very quickly and delivered online. Some of the lower rated questions, we had 2 here, which I thought was interesting when, Carolyn, you were talking about the networking and social side. That's one of the lower rated questions. Yeah, just in terms of like what the networking and social opportunities like. Obviously, that's naturally going to be impacted as our sort of activities to engage with employees outside of work. Yeah, they're naturally going to be hindered, so we expected those to be a bit lower. That said, the highest rated review question was around the understanding the company culture, which was quite a surprise to us because we didn't necessarily expect that to come across from a virtual platform, that company culture would be one of those things that really comes across and the ethos of the business. But actually, that's one thing that's been a real surprise and something that a lot of students have rated extremely highly. We've got 4 different themes for you, or 4 different trends, which I'll run through. The first one is around just students being super grateful for the experience. So we allow students to rate experiences. They also leave comments alongside, and yeah, just the outpouring of almost gratitude and just so delighted that they got their experience to go ahead. As we mentioned a bit earlier, that a lot of schemes during the Easter period had to be cancelled just because it was such short notice, and there were certainly quite a few businesses that turned around those experiences almost within a week or 2 to turn them virtual and make them happen. And it is very clear within all the review comments that the students recognise that, they understand the difficulties that undertook, and yeah, they just almost, like I say, outpourings of emotion, gratitude, and yeah, the brand love you'll get from doing that is huge. The second trend was around just the impressive organisation. So I'm sure all the HR teams that have done this know how difficult it has been to try and pull it all together and roll it out virtually. And yeah, that's one thing that really comes across. A lot of the students say they understand how difficult it is. They understand how to almost segment it. It has been very quite complicated. And yeah, I think it's certainly come across to them that the level of detail, the level of structure and organisation is something they've been really impressed with. And sort of linked in with that is almost how people have used the time as well. So what's coming out in the reviews is that the balance of presentation time, so time when you're listening to, let's say, presentations, compared to then individual task time or team task time away from almost being online, that's been really beneficial to help them give, or to get that sort of balance of experience. So elements that they're learning and consuming information, but also then trying to act on that and pull together tasks that are relevant to the business. The third of the 4 trends we've seen is around extroverts and introverts. And both of these, we believe, are shining through the new virtual platforms. So in the comments, a lot of students are recommending to really put your hand up, really ask loads of questions. And I think the virtual nature of these platforms is allowing those who are more extroverted to speak up, to put their hand up and speak out in front of 10 to 50, 100 of their peers, which is great that it's allowing that to facilitate people who are comfortable to do that. But equally, a lot of introverts aren't keen to do that, and that's not in their nature to do so. So what we are seeing is actually the virtual nature of that is allowing them to consume all the information and almost write down a response once they've had a chance to think about it, submit it via the platform, and then that question can be answered in a similar way to people actually putting their hand up. So actually, I think from a virtual perspective, the extrovert-introvert balance of allowing both to flourish is working really well. And the final one is around graduate buddies. So not one thing I personally expected, and I know a lot of the most successful undergraduate schemes have graduate buddies assigned to all the undergraduates that are coming on board. They're just great for asking those questions you don't want to ask your HR manager, or just sort of getting into the business, how it's working, and all those silly questions that you may not want to ask anyone else. Now, I didn't really expect those to still be assigned, even if it was virtual, but actually the most successful companies have had really good feedback from assigning graduate buddies, even in a virtual environment. So that's one thing I think, like I say, that's one of the main areas of really successful schemes, and that's been continued even in the virtual focus. So yeah, overall, there's really positive feedback. Really pleasantly surprised by it all, and yeah, we're gathering more and more as the days go by. So we'll be doing much more of a detailed report when we can.
Great, thanks, Ollie. Tom, is that something that you've seen replicated, that kind of feedback from the students that you've been working with on your platform?
Yeah, so unsurprisingly, a lot of that qualitative feedback we've also received. So we've had, I think, 5,500 student interns use the Inside Sherpa platform over COVID. So that's just for our actual closed internship programs, which are hosted by specific companies. And I kind of echo a lot of the themes that Ollie just raised then. A few other interesting pieces, like consistent pieces of feedback that we heard from students were that virtual programs felt like a lot more inclusive, particularly for those students who didn't live in metropolitan areas, who came from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. The stress associated with having to go to the city, travel to the city, find accommodation, leave your family, travel, all those types of things, like all those stresses were eliminated in a virtual platform, like through a virtual experience. So, I think what's been really pleasing to see, particularly in the UK, is where I think like a lot of companies in other regions have transitioned to a virtual setting just out of necessity and might not have seen the many positives that do come with that transition, that in the UK it was seen as like a real opportunity to kind of create a far more inclusive experience from students from different backgrounds. And that was certainly echoed by a lot of the students that were doing internships with our corporate partners. Another interesting thing we heard was that internships were less cliquey, in the sense that like when obviously when you're in person, like whether you're university or high school or whatever it is, that like little groups form and you kind of gravitate towards people that maybe you went to the same university, or whatever, and that dynamic, I guess, like didn't manifest itself as much in a virtual environment. And I guess because the companies had like greater control over how to set the parameters around like networking and like who you were speaking to, it actually meant that people, especially people who'd done like repeat internships, they felt that they met a lot more people and I guess like formed friendships and bonds with people that they might not usually have like formed bonds and friendships with. So when you think about like how do you hire an intern class which is like really cohesive and comes into your organization as like a as like a bonded pool of talent, I actually think there are like some like genuine arguments to say that a virtual setting might have like a positive impact on facilitating that. Another piece which kind of follows on from that, this was probably less so in the UK, but certainly in other regions, we saw more interaction. We got feedback that there was more interaction between students who were interning in different cities for the same company. So, you know, here in the US, for example, if you're like interning in LA and someone was interning in New York, you might usually not have like they might have like a 1 week kind of, you know, off-site where they got to meet each other. But I think there was like more continuous interaction through the life of the virtual internship. The other thing was like, I think firms, like just because like companies had to think more creatively about how to do the networking piece, I think we consistently heard that there was like an appreciation for the thought and effort that went into the networking and social events. So we saw some pretty like, you know, unique events happening out there in the world. So there was obviously like, you know, the virtual yoga and like, you know, drinks and whatnot. But we heard of like, you know, some of our clients, you know, there was like, you know, they got Michelin-hatted chefs to do like virtual cooking classes, for example. So I think we saw some like, you know, some real appreciation from students in terms of how companies like thought about facilitating that interaction in a virtual environment. We saw like virtual painting classes and that type of thing. But I think like the point that I'd end on is that while students like loved, you know, for the most part, and it's great to hear that quantitative figure that Ollie spoke about earlier, while students loved the virtual experience, like ultimately it's like really hard to replace that physical. We're all humans at the end of the day. Students are humans, and having that kind of physical human connection remains still very important. And I think like you know, what we're seeing in the UK is companies saying, okay, well, there are like lots of positives to like a virtual experience. There's lots of positives to a physical experience. Like it doesn't have to be either or. Like you don't have to choose one or the other. And this idea of like adopting a hybrid model, and we've seen more chatter about that in the UK than in other regions, I think is like a really exciting path for companies to be going down. But I don't think the virtual internship is going to replace you know, the physical experience, but I think that that hybrid model could be really interesting going forward.
That's great, thanks, Tom. So Carolyn and Laura, I'll go to Carolyn first actually, because I think it's always confusing on webinars. We don't specifically talk to. I just wondered if that sort of feedback that Tom and you have gone through, Tom, do you recognise actually that's what your students have been saying, their expectations?
Do you want to go first?
I think the kind of main point I think that Ollie had made was I think students were kind of incredibly grateful that the scheme was still able to go ahead first and foremost. There was some things absolutely in terms of feedback around socials. You perhaps can't get that quite right on a virtual platform the way that you would when you're there face to face. One of the things that's quite interesting, and this isn't student feedback, but it was from me and my team, we actually found more engagement from our senior stakeholders than we would normally have at our schemes, where sometimes you have to kind of bludgeon partners with the stick to be like, come on, you need to come down and you need to meet them and come along to the quiz night, come along to drinks, or take the intern out for a coffee. We saw a lot more engagement where people really wanted to get to know them. And again, I think we are only human and we're all at home, we're all in the same space, so I think it encouraged people to really reach out. I think it's a really interesting point about the introvert and extrovert, where we would see those that were perhaps a bit shy through our recruitment process who were quite proactive, where we saw mentors reaching out to them and them reaching out with their cameras on. So I would say there is an element where we saw more interaction, where previously somebody perhaps gets a little bit lost if it's a face-to-face scheme and they fly under the radar. But I think that the biggest surprise for us was the kind of more senior stakeholder engagement, and maybe that is they just want to be involved socially a little bit more. But it was a really pleasant time for us to see those really senior people wanting to get involved and be involved.
That's great, because that senior engagement is really important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Laura, what were your thoughts on that feedback?
Yeah, I think I recognise quite a lot of it, particularly on the sort of the grad buddies piece that Ollie was talking about, because we did assign grad coaches to all of our interns. So they either had one-to-one or one-to-two support from grads themselves, but we also then put into place sort of wider support networks. So we had, I suppose, what you'd call home groups. So it was one grad looking after sort of 15 interns and being sort of a point of contact if they had problems in their placement and queries and things like that. Because as an emerging talent team, I have one person that runs the internship for over 100 interns. So it was a huge ask, especially because we weren't bringing in experts or using a sort of virtual platform. We were sort of doing it ourselves. So we've become experts on Zoom now, and we know how to use all the breakout functionality. And I think that was key. It was giving them sort of time in different groups so they could build their own connections and things like that. So that worked really well for us. But we also run our program in a way that the grads run it. So we have 24 grads, I think we had in our working group this year, and then they were each then responsible for their own parts of delivery. So we had a team of 6 looking at the development piece, and then they sort of broke that down. So we were setting milestones for our grad coaches, for example. We had our diversity inclusion projects, we had speaker series. So there was lots of ways that they could connect and sort of build those connections, which I think the one thing that Ollie mentioned was about sort of the social scores maybe not being as high. We actually found it was better from anecdotal feedback, certainly from what our interns were telling us, because usually they are geographically spread out. So they might be with, say, 5 interns in one location, and then they might not have a wider social circle. But with this platform, we had some of our interns were in Singapore, for example, doing it, and then they were still able to be part of the social events and things that they organised. So yeah, definitely it was a positive experience from our side and from the intern side, I think. So I'm not surprised the scores have gone up.
Cool. I've got a few questions coming through, and I'll cover them at the end. But actually, there's one I've got here that I think would be a good one to ask yourselves, Carolyn and Laura. So this question came actually from another Laura, and they were just asking actually. Laura said they struggled to build out the social elements of their virtual experiences. And have you guys got any insights about what social activities did work really well in the virtual space?
I'm happy to go first, Laura, if that's okay. With the drink social networking, it has to be using Zoom and small rooms, otherwise it won't work. Ones that did work in a social aspect were quizzes where we could be interactive and we could put people into, we use Skype for Business, so we could have groups and they can interact with each other. And we did use an external company for all of our schemes as well, who did virtual escape and virtual game shows. That was actually relatively cheap. And it was really, really good fun. So those worked really, really well. But I think if you have to look at the platform that you're working over, if you are looking at, I think, networking drinks, and it has to be small groups. Otherwise, you end up, as I say, you're on a screen with 50 people with one person speaking and everyone else kind of sitting feeling really awkward.
And Laura, what were your experiences? What did you think worked best in trying to get the social piece covered off?
So I think ours worked because we just let the grads run with it. So sometimes we got an invite and sometimes we didn't. So the ones that we were part of was sort of group scavenger hunts. They got quite competitive quite quickly. We also had social leads within the interns. So before they started, we asked who would like to be a social lead, and sort of in their induction, they did the first night of social, and then they were doing sort of people bingo and things like that. I ducked out after that, so I couldn't tell you sort of how it actually worked. But the next day, they all seemed to quite enjoy it and sort of be quite fresh-faced and things like that. So yeah, I think if you can give some responsibility and autonomy to grads and things like that within your business, you can probably leave a lot of that sort of thing up to them, because they know what would be fun. It was a while ago since I was at university, so what I think's fun probably differs from their perspective. So that worked for us.
Good point. It's funny you mentioned scavenger hunts. I remember doing a webinar in the early part of lockdown, and I heard a thumping outside the door here, because that's my daughter doing a scavenger hunt with a school friend. So yes, can get very, very competitive. Yeah, and one of the this is an idea from Lindsay from SAP actually, so I'm not going to pretend it was ours, though we did actually use the same person to do a couple of IEC networking events online, and that was they hired a human jukebox, a guy who was a musician who just did stuff to requests on Zoom, and I think that worked very well. I have to get him back actually. Tom, you mentioned earlier when we were chatting about actually I guess some of the global aspects in different sectors of what you do. Are there any trends you've seen emerging in other markets? I don't know, there might be markets actually that experienced COVID before we did, or anything that other maybe UK employers could learn from?
Yeah, so I mean, we definitely saw differences. Some of it UK can learn from, some of it UK might not be able to learn from it. I think if you think about the main regions that we operate in, which is the US, UK and Asia, I think everyone responded to it very differently. And that was driven by like kind of macro forces. So, you know, in like, you know, we also, people really can tell from my accent, I'm Australian, so we work with like a lot of Australian companies. I think Australia, for example, is still like COVID hasn't like broken out as badly as it has in other parts of the world. So they're kind of almost like in this like purgatory, like no man's land, where they don't know whether to actually go in person or go virtual. There's been like a lot of faltering on that front. The US, we saw denial is probably the wrong word, but we certainly saw like American companies kind of clinging on to the hope that things were going to return back to normal, and like they made their decisions with turning things virtual far later than what the UK, like our UK customers did. You know, we had like, you know, 1, 2, 3 weeks before programs were meant to start, like we had, you know, companies in New York who were like, no, we're still hoping that, and this was, if you remember, New York was like absolutely being ravaged at this point. We're still hoping that we can like bring people into the office, because like we can't imagine how else we would do this. So I think we saw greater conviction in like the early decision making in the UK compared to the US. What we did see in the US though is that companies typically didn't shorten their programs, they kept the programs the same length, which is like a pretty incredible effort. Like you've got like 8 12-week programs, and then you're like 3 weeks before it, you're like, okay, I'm going to transition this virtually, and filling up like a 12-week program, you know, virtually, we've learned is like a really difficult thing to do. Whereas we saw in the UK that a lot of companies were kind of truncating, you know, like shortening their experience, and certainly not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying that's certainly like a trend that we saw. In the UK, we certainly saw, I guess, like companies gravitate towards like increasing the L&D training component of their programs, whereas in the US, we certainly saw companies really kind of cling to trying to facilitate actual work, which proved to be, in some situations, like a bit of a logistical nightmare when you think about, you know, I'm sure everyone on this call has an appreciation for like privacy and like, you know, security infrastructure and like the procurement process that you have to go through for like students, like, you know, sitting at home dealing with like confidential client matters. Like there was like a real logistical kind of like nightmare getting that to happen. But like a lot of companies in the US persevered and like made that happen, which I think like students certainly appreciated in the US market. One thing which it's great, because Laura obviously was talking about HSBC before using this, but I think we saw generally, like none of these rules are hard and fast, but we generally saw that US companies were making really went out of their way with when they were trying to do like a 12-week program. They're like, well, we're gonna have like a lot of dead space here. And what they did is they got their students really involved in charitable initiatives. So that's how they filled up like a lot of their time. And so that's like a great thing, because like the companies reinvest, like investing back into the community. You know, students like that if it's in a law context, that pro bono commitment didn't dissipate like in a virtual setting. In actual fact, students were doing more, and they were, you know, getting paired with like different charitable organizations. And that was also against the broader backdrop here in the US around, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, which is obviously being top of mind for the community here at the moment. So like it was a real opportunity for companies to kind of showcase their commitment to charitable causes and get their interns involved. So we saw that certainly probably more here in the US than the UK. We also saw there's obviously some great work happening in the UK between employers and universities, but I think we saw more targeted partnerships in the US between employers and universities, and we saw some like really interesting models emerge. So we saw this one model which has emerged with quite a few companies where they do like co-branded learning and internship programs between a company and a particular university. So like, for example, local university here is like UC Berkeley. You know, some of the big tech companies would do like a, you know, tech company / UC Berkeley like internship program where like all the UC Berkeley comp-sci majors were able to do like, you know, attend webinars, like attend, you know, development programs with some of these partner companies. So that was like another thing that was interesting to see. And then the only final thing I'd say about what we saw in Asia is we saw some like, not so much on the like internship piece, but on the recruitment piece, we're seeing some like pretty creative and like quirky solutions to like campus recruitment in this like new paradigm. So, you know, we've seen like one firm who's actually one of our customers who have actually set up like sent out disposable VR headsets to like thousands and thousands of students, and like have created this like virtual reality world where, you know, students get this like VR headset, put it on, and then can kind of like experience at obviously a pretty shallow level what it's like to work at that company. We've seen like much more, like we've seen really interesting ways around like keep warm strategies, like post internships in Asia. There's like a lot of focus in Asia on how to like kind of facilitate keep warm strategies in a virtual setting. But yeah, so I realize there's a lot in that, and they're all not all lessons to be learned by the UK, but I guess like we definitely did see those kind of differences emerge between those three markets.
That's great, thanks, Tom. And what about the future, Ollie? Do you think, you know, obviously we're still very much in this COVID environment, but if we try and think of actually how this might evolve, you know, as we come out of the current crisis, do you think virtual is here to stay from what you've seen and what both employers and students are experiencing?
I mean, yeah, the obvious answer is yes to that, given all the plaudits been given everyone on this webinar. But I think from my perspective, everything we've learned, everything we've seen from students and chatting to clients about, I think the most effective schemes have been run, certainly virtually, when they have been shortened. I think Tom and maybe Laura at some points have said the longer schemes are really difficult to try and pull into a virtual environment. So whether that's 8 to 12 weeks summer internships or even year-long summer placements, it's going to be very difficult to try and get the level of content to keep the quality high, the engagement high, to make that work and make it successful. So I certainly see them being used more efficiently, more effectively for the shorter term schemes. So running, say, like one-day insight schemes up to a week, I think they'll be the ones that will continue to be virtual, even in 5-10 years' time, when we're hopefully all through this. I think they can be run more efficiently. There's all the the carbon footprint issues of trying to get lots of travel around. They solved that issue. I think Tom highlighted quite a lot of plus points for doing it virtually as well from a social mobility perspective. So I think, yeah, once you can get a condensed amount of content and make that really effective, that can work really well. I think it'd be a brilliant way to bring talent into the business, show them a bit about what it's like to work there, the culture, the vibe, and yeah, that hopefully then filters through to either year-long applications or graduate roles as well.
And Tom, you might be a little bit biased with this question, but I was wondering what you saw the future as virtual internships. Obviously, very strong because it's the foundations of your business. But I mean, how do you see it evolving? Do you see what we've learned in this current crisis just increasing the appetite for virtual internships and see them changing in shape?
Of course. I mean, we've seen that, and we are biased. We saw the world. We believed at Inside Sherpa that the world was moving in that direction before COVID. COVID has just like accelerated that change. Most of the campus leaders that we're speaking to are saying, like, look, we knew we were heading in this direction, but organizations like take their time to make changes, and this has just kind of given us a kick up the backside to get there quicker. What I will say, which is not contrarian, is that like virtual experiences can never replace like that physical kind of experience, and that's certainly not like our belief at Inside Sherpa. There is like a lot of utility in continuing to run those programs, but I think, as Ollie said before, particularly with the shorter programs, we can go virtually. And like just from a numbers perspective, like our open access programs, we were getting like 20 to 30,000 students every month enrolling in our programs pre-COVID. We've had 900,000 students enroll in our programs since April, since COVID. So like and you'll have seen like the Bright network, like other people out there who are providing these online experiential programs and like bringing the world of work online are just exploding. And I don't think that's going to, even when we get through this, Ollie, you said 5 to 10 years. I hope it's not 5 to 10 years till we're through this, but however long it takes, like I don't think there's no going back to February. That just doesn't happen.
Cool. I'm really conscious of time. We always try and get these done within the hour. I've got a few questions that hopefully we'll be able to bang through. A couple of questions actually from two different people about schools. Actually, obviously, the thrust of this conversation has been towards university students, but a couple of employers saying here, of course, they're very active in the schools market. So I wondered if anybody is either using this on school-based students, college-based students, or know of anybody else who might be.
I'm happy to. I'm sure Laura. You may have had involvement, but I'm happy to answer Laura from Ashurst. I wasn't directly involved, but I work very closely with our social impact team, and we run another programme which is Access Ashurst, which specifically targets social mobility. And again, that was a programme that was supposed to happen in July and then moved online. So that's targeting year 12 students. And again, Ella Blakesley, who's our social impact manager, just trying to replicate as much as you would normally have in the office. We still had volunteering, and it was able to kind of shift quite smoothly. Again, to echo what Tom said, you're never going to completely match that kind of physical experience, but it did work really, really well. And again, I would assume that would continue to go on next year. I would imagine it again, it would be a blended approach, whether it be some coming into the office and some being able to be offered online. But again, it was just, I think, ensuring that everyone has tech, and that was one thing that we'd contacted all of our students to say, do you need tech? Have you got the capabilities? Where they didn't have it, we were able to send it out. And again, just updating. I think Laura had covered this is the etiquette, and again, I think when you're working with a school programme, that's we kind of built the foundations from Ella's programme around that etiquette, so we kind of need to strip it back to school level rather than grads, where this is your kind of professional conduct, if you like, and just putting together a manual that then can be kind of used for all of your programmes if they're going to go into a virtual platform. So again, it transitioned quite easily.
Another question I've got here around, we touched a little bit on different personality types, so introverted, extroverted, but I have a question here around diversity in terms of actually disabled people. And I don't know if anybody's got any thoughts on whether actually the switch to virtual has made it easier or more difficult to deal with students that may have disabilities or special education needs. Is that something that anybody's had to factor in?
Particularly from our perspective, we've had to put like a lot of investment into our product, more so than what we would have done in the past, to be able to do that. And that's a really good question, because I don't think that was something, you know, in the throng of everyone moving virtual really quickly. I think that's one thing that was forgotten, and you know, we were kind of back in mind, and we were certainly learned that you have to kind of address that early. But yes, I mean, everyone should be like super aware around how to make sure that online experiences, virtual experiences are as inclusive and as accessible as they possibly can be for people who are disabled. And then the other piece, which isn't directly connected to that, we've also seen is don't assume that everyone has like strong working internet connection or like a laptop or things like that, because like we've had plenty of situations where students don't have access to high speed Wi-Fi at all, or kind of working laptops. So yeah, I think those considerations are super important, and that's something we've been working with a lot of our corporate customers to make sure that the programs are as inclusive and accessible as possible.
Great. And I've got one last question that I'll end on. I think we covered most of them. And I was going to ask this question anyway. And actually, this is directed at Carolyn and Laura. And I hesitate to ask it. But what about next year? Have you actually started to make plans for your programs next year? Or is it just still too uncertain at the moment? Laura, do you want to go first?
Yeah, although I feel like I've not breathed since last Friday, so might need to give myself a couple of months. But yeah, we are running our programme next year. So we're actively recruiting now. I don't know what it's going to look like. I think we could run it virtually again if we thought there was benefit in doing it. I think we need a bit of a period of reflection to sort of understand from the intern's perspective and also from the business what value they've been able to gain and add to HSBC, but really open to sort of exploring things, because I think, like Tom said, it has prompted us to be a lot more creative around about how we do things, and just because we've always done it one way doesn't mean it's the best way. So yeah, I'm open to it once I've recovered from this year.
What about you, Carolyn? Are you thinking that far ahead yet?
Yeah, we've actually just opened our recruitment. Where our next vacation scheme is winter, which runs in December, so it's highly likely that that will be another virtual scheme, and we're opening in October for our spring and summer scheme. I think we will probably take a blended approach. I love the capabilities of the virtual internship. One of the issues we moved to amazing new offices last year in London, but we don't have as much space, so we had to limit how many could come on to our vacation scheme. Offering it on a virtual platform actually allows us to offer more spaces. And in terms of diversity and inclusion, as Tom mentioned earlier, we know that some people financially can't afford to relocate to London for a few weeks. To ensure that we get the best talent, I think we will take in the future a blended approach where we will still have some face-to-face, but we will be doing a lot of activity on a virtual platform, including vacation schemes, but also a lot of our campus activity and attraction events as well.
Cool, great. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm really conscious of time. There was one last question that I'll deal with, actually, which was around unpaid internships, and that's probably kind of a whole other rabbit warren. But I think it's fair to say that all the employees that we work with, it tends to be, I think, because it's the larger employers do pay their interns. And our view is anything over a couple of weeks should be paid, because above that you're starting to get into work. It's a productive benefit for the employees. And actually, the person who asked the question, Satna, mentioned that it's SMEs that are, I think she's from a university, are coming back to them. And we found in the past it is that kind of SME sector of the market where it's a problem. But I'll end on that point there. A really great conversation. Thanks very much. We covered an awful lot of ground there. So if there's bits of this that you'd like to go back on for those of you in the audience, then please visit the YouTube channel. Like I said, this webinar will be up there, and please feel free to share it. And also keep an eye out for our upcoming webinars. We've got one next week on virtual autumn and how to prepare your attraction programs in the light of the current crisis, and how you might do that virtually. We've got a whole other raft of events that I won't rattle through, because you can see them on our site. But thank you very much. A big virtual round of applause to you all, and hope to see you all again, if not on a video camera, then maybe hopefully in person one day before too long. Take care, all of you, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.